Okay, so I have two topics, as I said. One of them is I'm asking you to think about this notion that we were implicitly discussing of what philosophy is tragic. What does it mean to say philosophy is tragic? To explain it, give elucidation about it in terms of Sophocles to a certain extent, maybe, but it's up to you. And then relying on some fragments from Heraclitus, Anaximander, Testimonia, etc., to illustrate this point. Um, that's uh, that's the topic. Now, if you find that objectionable and not preferable, I ask you also create your own topic. Uh, I have one major, very important stipulation that you need to have a topic and you need to write that topic at the beginning of your paper explicitly in bold letters. Like it's not okay that it is implied in your first paragraph. It's not supposed to be explained in one paragraph. In this paper, I'm going to do this, blah, blah. None of them is acceptable. You just have to write at the very beginning a sentence or two or three or five, whatever. Well, don't write five, like 2 or 3 sentences. Explain what Anaximander means by apeiron. In light of pre-Socratic writers, pre-Socratic philosophers, uh, what does it mean that everything has an origin? I don't know. I'm making it up. I mean, you need to make it up yourself. So you need to start thinking about the paper, do reading about it, and I don't know, prepare drafts, make outlines, etc. as soon as possible. I would strongly recommend if you are um, not willing to come up with your own topic and write on the tragic nature of philosophy, read, continue to read Nietzsche this weekend, and at least up to page 61, Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosophy in the tragic age of the Greeks. So read that, and uh, that will help you a little bit to contextualize the question and answer. I have not yet, but I will post the question on Moodle at the top. I mean, not top, but at the top block. So you can see it, read it, and let me know if you have any questions. Uh, what does it mean to say that philosophy is tragic? By discussing specific fragments from pre-Socratic philosophers, explain how they illustrate this statement, which implies you have to at least discuss two separate fragments to articulate this point. So I'm thinking this about 4 or 5 double-spaced pages, nothing like a research paper or you need to do um, further reading, etc. I'm not really interested at this stage in your ability to read and synthesize other people. I'm much more interested in how you think about these texts. I think one of the things that we do not really teach in writing is illustrate your independent thinking. We always ask you, give you a uh, structure or form in which you have to write your paper. I do not have such form. I am leaving it up to your formulation, which in many ways makes it much more difficult for you, actually. This is the problem with freedom. You actually don't want it because it gives you a lot of responsibility. So, but I don't need like formulaic papers like you need to do this and then you need to do that and then you need to do that. I don't have such stipulation. Just engage with the text, think and write. And as you write, try to learn, make mistakes, and use this as a process of learning rather than producing a product that will be on sale on the market. Questions?
Sorry, you said November 2nd?
Is that a Monday?
That's a Tuesday? Monday?
I was
That
hoping.
is a Monday, yeah.
Okay, Monday, 11:59 p.m. is your deadline on Moodle.
On November 2nd.
On November 2nd, not November 3rd. The last minute of November 2nd.
Okay, thanks.
I have not made that yet, but this weekend, the topic and the assignment will be there. I usually put the assignment, I mean, you have to look at, I at this point have this blind trust that you know how to navigate Moodle. So you'll find it somewhere. It is either on the top. I'll probably put it on the week of November 2nd. I usually don't, I usually erase, or not erase, but make it invisible the weeks that we spent before. But I don't do that in this type at this time because the classes, the recording of the classes are attached to those weeks. So all weeks are available at all times. So you need to go find the correct week, and the assignment will be the week of November 2nd. I mean, this is unnecessarily confusing. You'll find out.
Fareed?
Yes.
For these papers, are there going to be any opportunities of any kind of like rewrite or anything, or is it just you submit it, you get your grade, that's it?
Usually with the first paper, I tend to give that option to rewrite if you are not happy with your grade. Usually I stipulate that, I stipulate that you can raise your grade up to 1 full letter grade. So if you got a D, you are not getting A, but you might get a C. If you got a B, you can get an A. If you got an A, don't rewrite it. Anything about the content? Any ideas about the papers that you want to try out to help others to think about the paper topic? If you were thinking, which you should be, if I were to write a paper on this class, in this class, I would write this. Why am I the only one who is thinking about this class? This is always my paradox of teaching. Like, I have a responsibility to teach, perhaps, probably, yes. But more than that, maybe you have a responsibility to learn. So, which is a very difficult concept to convey in the general context of educational system. It appears to be like is that okay? Am I making this up? That there's always this guy. I mean, I was a student too. I probably performed this too. I resist to be taught, and the professor has to teach me. Like, oh, I need to go to class. And like, I mean, when I cancel class, everybody's happy. It's like, why are you happy that the class is canceled? Like, that's opposite of what should happen. Or, if I say you should not write your first paper, you'll probably be happy, rather than saying like, what? We should write the first paper. That's how we learn. So it's a really bizarre relationship. I don't know. Am I wrong? Please tell me I'm wrong.
I feel like there's a difference between being like disinterested in learning and just being tired all the time, which is at least the case for me, and I assume at least some other people can relate to that.
So you are tired all the time? Seriously? Wow, that's hard. Like, yeah, let's stop the video. Psychological support. So any questions about the papers? some of you wrote papers for me before, so if you have insights to share that you learned about papers with other people, Blessed, Josue, Nancy, David, Caitlin, Jared, any,
I have a question.
yes.
What if, like, for a topic, I were to accuse Antigone, and then try to determine based off of the text who was the villain, or like the would that be a suitable topic? Like, who was the bad guy? A bit Cleon or Antigone?
Well, let's think together. Like, of course, in this paper, I'm going to accuse Antigone would not be a good paper topic. How would you formulate that as a paper topic?
Mm, I don't know.
Analyze and evaluate the function of the character of Antigone in the play Antigone, and situate her in terms of her responsibility to the state law.
Okay.
So you can write everything that you want to write about Antigone, but you formulate it in the context of a question.
Okay.
They evaluate. Now, of course, I would prefer that you talk a little bit more about pre-Socratic philosophers too. But if you are just going to write on Antigone, make sure that you talk about tragedy as a concept. What does tragedy mean? We discussed this a couple of times. The literal meaning of the term, the ode to the goat, which kind of rhymes, I suppose. The sort of a Dionysian ritual, and explaining how human life is both finite and to a certain extent paradoxical, in the sense that we try to solve our problems. If we are always thinking about, like, as if life is a problem or a riddle, as Oedipus solves, as a riddle to be solved, but then all the while working ourselves towards death, and that's our inescapable fate. So, and even like, well, anyway, yeah. So that would be a good topic. But then again, okay, so I want you to be readers, not, so it's like you're not watching Antigone as a spectacle, as an audience. Like, there is no person, like there is no real person Antigone. I mean, what would it mean to accuse her? Like, that would be like when people say that they read a novel and they say, I didn't like that character. Yeah, like, but that character is probably created for you not to like. That's precisely the function of that character. So if you are simply responding emotionally to a play or any kind of dramatic display, then you are really biting into how people want to manipulate you. So that's really the sort of, being a reader is taking one step further and say, why does Sophocles create the character of Antigone like this? What's the point here? What are they trying to articulate? So it's an analysis, not a reaction. So we are not writing book reviews or film reviews. We are writing analysis. For that, you need a certain level of awareness that once you have the emotional reaction, you need to step back from that emotional reaction. Is it possible that the author created this character precisely because I should have this emotional reaction? And that's the level of analysis. So don't accuse Antigone. She's cool. Does that make sense? In general, you are sort of, I mean, not you personally, but there's a certain desire to like register your review of the material. This is, I blame, as everything else, capitalism for this. So like the review, like you go to a hotel and say, I didn't like it. I liked it. It was good. It wasn't good. That's the level at which we engage with things. And then, you know, I teach novels sometimes. People say, I didn't like that novel. I like this novel, which I respectfully, with a proper mask, say, I don't really care. It's not really about that at all. You may or may not like it. I don't like it. Doesn't matter. The question is, you need to think why that novel is created in such a precise way that you had that reaction. And that's really a next level of analysis, going beyond my immediate reaction and understanding the fact that certain art objects or any kind of human communication is created with the intention of precisely producing that emotion in you. And you saying that, oh, I have that emotion, is precisely falling into the manipulative structure of the novel, film, etc. So you create villains, you love or hate villains, etc. These are all dramatic articulations that are designed to precisely produce that in you. So you are not being any thoughtful in just registering your reaction. You need to take one step, two steps back and analyze that, oh, how do they create this? How do they make me love this character? How do they make me hate this character? What are they doing? That would be a second level of analysis, or I mean, the first level is not even an analysis, but second level of reflection that would go beyond your immediate reaction. That would also how I how I managed to not to have emotional reaction to certain political candidates, because I say they are doing it just because to make me angry. And that's why I'm not going to get angry and fall into their trap. I mean, people like me, not just me personally, but people who think in a certain way, they just sort of really want to irritate you because they want to give a message to somebody else, etc. And now you get, oh, so crazy about it. And in fact, that's precisely what, you know, what they want. Okay, so anyway, I want analysis. I want your thoughts, your ideas, your reflections. Not like I like Antigone, I dislike Creon, etc. I mean, have those. I mean, I'm not saying don't have emotional reaction. That's the beauty of reading the play, but you don't need to write down. Okay, anything else? Question? Don't be afraid of being social. Ask questions. So I went to of whatever that was. Okay, so Nietzsche. So what did you first like? What did you think about his take of pre-Socratic philosophers? I mean, the reason that I'm asking is because, well, specifically, I tell you what. On page 2930, it has been pointed out assiduously, to be sure, how much the Greeks were able to find abroad in the Orient and learn from abroad in the Orient. And it is doubtless true that they picked up much there. So this is something that we discussed in terms of cultural specificity of the ancient Greek philosophy. So Nietzsche says something really interesting here, and I think we should evaluate that statement. He says, It is a strange spectacle, however, to see the alleged teachers from the Orient and their Greek disciples exhibited side by side. For example, Zoroaster has a lot in common with Heraclitus. Heraclitus takes from him. Hindus next to Eleatics, Egyptians next to Empedocles, or even Anaxagoras amidst the Jews, and the Pythagoras amidst the Chinese. As to specifics, very little has been discovered by such a juxtaposition. Why? Why? Why can't we learn like, oh, Heraclitus took all his ideas from Zoroaster? Why is he insisting on this? Is it true? Do you agree? This is cultural sensitivity training via ancient Greek philosophy.
I mean, appropriation is just kind of a hallmark of Western academia. Like, it's not seen as a morally incorrect thing, I think. And I think that's kind of why, like, Nietzsche is okay with.
Is it morally problematic to learn from other cultures?
It's not morally problematic to learn from other cultures, but to take the ideas and claim that they're your own, I think personally is morally wrong. But I don't think that, like, a lot of Western academia likes to turn their head and pretend that isn't a thing. Like, we kind of don't want to cope with our own appropriation, so we just pretend that, like, we're all geniuses and that we came up with it on our own, or that we took something that was so simplistic and baseline and built it into something much grander, which I think is kind of what Nietzsche is maybe saying, like the Greeks did, thinking like, oh, well, they took this from here, but they made it somehow better, and in that sense kind of peaked at, like, human culture, and they're the ones that really made that upswing happen, and then everything else is what kind of brought it down.
Okay, I agree with general spirit of what you said, Jack.
And also, yeah, like, instead of like maybe calling it an infatuation with the ancient Greeks, it's kind of more of like an obsession over whatever they've been talking about and whatever the philosophers have been believing in. And even throughout the reading, you have terms like putting other cultures to shame, and then like no culture greater than like the Greek culture as well. So it's definitely a fairly biased reading from what I got anyway. There was very, very little compliment or nice things said about other cultures, while, like I said earlier, seemed pretty obsessed with ancient Greek philosophy.
Okay, good. Olivia?
And related to that, Nietzsche keeps like coming back again and again to the idea that a healthy culture can only be one with, he says, a unity of style. So like a sort of cultural monoliths are the only way to have like a real culture, is what I interpreted him as arguing again and again, which I think is concerning, because it sort of means that it's you know, the prerogative of societies to sort of suppress the cultural attributes that don't fall within like the cultural hegemony of the like state structure.
Yeah, okay. Good point. Anybody wants to say on behalf of Nietzsche? Yes, Blessed.
Yeah. I just found it interesting, like the reading, like what everyone else. I agree with like what everyone else is saying as well, but like I also looked at it like it seems like he's saying, like he's saying Greek culture was like the epitome of like a perfect like culture and everything like that. Like he's in like very high praise of them, but like the reasoning for me was because it's like it seems like he's saying, like basically Kate kind of hinted at that they were a combination of different things. They accepted and learned from everything. And like I just find like that idea like consistent with like how we view the world today in terms of like diversity and everything. Like we want to look at like a culture and say like the more diverse it is, the better a culture is. that kind of thing. Like, so it's just like something that I thought of.
Well, that certainly flips the argument to the other side, because he says on the contrary, they invariably absorbed other living cultures. The very reason they got so far is that they know how to pick up the spear and throw it onward from the point where others have left it. So in fact, he is praising the Greeks, not so much being a monolithic culture, but a culture that can learn and be multicultural and absorb, etc. So that's the other side of it. But just to defend academia a little bit, not like what they are doing is okay, but is it only academia? So like, you live in the United States, you learn the Constitution, you're right. I mean, those of you who are, and isn't there sort of this notion that the United States is a unique idea that emerged in what, 1776 or something? Like, that's just so like wonderful, and don't we constantly say like founding fathers, and that's like the moment. So okay, whether this is true or not, which obviously it cannot be just factually true, but why do we do that? Why do we do that? Any of us, and I'm sure like if I carry some of you left-leaning people, so you are obviously irritated by the term "Make America Great Again," but do you have a little bit longing for 2008, 2009, compared to today? Seriously, Grandpa?
To be fair, I was like 7 then, so it's a little bit different.
That is really depressing, but really, so you guys are born in 2001? Oh, well, earlier. Anybody is born before 2000, after 2002? No, 2002?
Oh, 2003, actually.
So how many of you were like alive at 9/11? Okay, good. That my world still makes sense. So, but yeah, 2009, Grant Park, Chicago. Obama wins the election. Like everybody is like crying and screaming. That's a sort of pure joy moment that maybe in 2020 you should like, I wish we were in 2009. So the glorification of the past really, rather than speaking to an objective relationship to the past, speaks to something like a relationship to today, to the contemporary world. So you glorify the past because you have an issue with the present. And Nietzsche has an issue with the present, his present. So he has an issue with the German culture at the time. And that's why his reading of the Greeks, for the most part, is a result of that, like everybody else. Now, does that justify what he says? No, but it sort of puts it into a context. And it says, people ask, and now I want to go to the first, there are people who are opposed to all philosophy, and one does well to listen to them, particularly when they advise the diseased minds of Germans to stay away from metaphysics. So he starts out with the diseased minds of the Germans. So he obviously has a problem with contemporary German at the time. The physician of our culture repudiates philosophy, like philosophy asks questions. And here's the thing. Well, let me read this. Whoever wishes to justify it must show, therefore, to what ends a healthy culture uses and used philosophy. Perhaps the sick, when they actually gain salutary insight into why philosophy is harmful specifically to them. So let's just think about the United States for 1 second. Like, do you think that we live in a healthy culture? In general. If somebody were to ask you, or healthy world, I don't want to say the United States, like, do you live in, I mean, we definitely don't live in healthy times because everybody's getting sick, but like healthy in the sense that a culture that is supportive, makes you happy to belong to a gathering or a group of people, supports you, affirms you, improves you? Or do you more like look at it as a struggle of the individual with respect to like everybody, it's going to be so hard, it's going to be so hard, I'm going to have to try hard, I'm going to struggle, fight, etc. It is not inviting, I need to find my way into it. And I'm not asking just simply your personal take as much as how do you think other people around you express that?
Well, I feel like because of like a lot of Eurocentric, Western-centric kind of impositions of their own values and views, the world's become a lot more individualistic in a sense. And of course, capitalism has a huge part to play in that. Let's say that, you know, ultimately we're all fending for ourselves. There's nothing wrong with that. But, you know, fending for ourselves and caring for ourselves doesn't mean, you know, we can't care for others, or we can't have like a fairly healthy and caring culture or lifestyle. But you know, yeah, we don't, like, especially in the Western world. You know, everything's like, oh, what I want to do, what this and that. And sure, I think personal freedom is really important, but in certain cultures, you know, collectivism, or you know, the notion of, you know, helping each other, having a family, not just within your own family, you know, is something that it's been slept on. And yeah, it's just,
Okay.
yeah.
I mean, the reason I hesitate a little bit, like, I don't want you to think that being healthy and unhealthy is really kind of the distinction between individualistic and group. So, like, there are different cultures, as you said. I think that Turkey is also one of those cultures, supposedly, that emphasizes the group and the family and the community more than the individual, but that's completely unhealthy too.
Of course, yeah, no, and I 100% agree with that, right? I lived in China for 12 years. I'm not a fan of the culture at all, even though it is collectivist. But
So there seems to be a general crisis, regardless of the nature. But the notion of the crisis is that there doesn't seem to be a unity, and health for somehow associated with different parts being in harmony with itself, with themselves. So that's his definition of this. So he sees sick cultures as not harmonious, not in one style, not together. It is disharmonious and fractured. Yes, Charlie.
In saying something is not harmonious or fractured or something, that like inherently require, you're inherently thinking with respect to some reference point, right? Because
Yeah.
you can't determine that. So I guess like from like what is it, what's the model for something that is harmonious? Like, has it ever existed? Is it just an idealized thing that could never come to be? That's kind of the issue I have when thinking about like quality of a culture, or like comfort and stuff like that. It requires reference points, which just make things so much different for everyone. And I don't think it's something to be resolved, but it's just something I thought about.
Okay, Olivia. Yes.
I think for me, probably the best example of cultural unity in the United States, at least in recent years, is probably the lead up to the Iraq War, because of the sort of cultural hegemony that was, or not hegemony, homogeny that was like kind of imposed, and it was kind of made like,
That was a Freudian slip, and I think that's absolutely true, because I was opposed to the Iraq war and like even war in Afghanistan, even in 2001, when you were 1 year old, apparently, some of you. So you're right. I mean, homogeneity and hegemony, somehow that sort of little slip of tongue, and I think that we might pretend to be healthy once we sort of repress the sort of discordant voices. So just because everybody agrees on a common enemy, which wasn't really even an enemy, doesn't really make our culture healthy, definitely. But let's push that health analogy in terms of what Charlie said, and then you added in terms of, are you healthy now? when you look at your body, when you listen to your body, do you say, so can you imagine can you imagine being healthy? Well, I guess, I mean, you take pills, you go to a doctor, you do certain things. So you obviously want to restore a state of being, right? So an absence of discordance. I don't have any pain. I don't have fever. I don't have my stomach falling down. I don't have my kidneys like acting up. So smooth. It's cool. I'm healthy. Whoops. My head hurts. My back hurts. I have fever. I have COVID, etc. So now I need to try to restore a previous state, which I believed that existed. But it is possible that when you think that you are healthy, you actually, I mean, not you, I, for example, think that I'm healthy, but I have cancer. That didn't come up. I don't feel the symptoms. I don't understand, but I have it somewhere, lungs probably, not diagnosed yet. I don't feel the symptoms. I'm living. I believe that I'm healthy. I experience myself as healthy, but I'm actually not healthy until I find out, and after that I die, right? So think of this same analogy that Nietzsche makes with respect to contemporary, let's say contemporary American society. I mean, wherever you are in the world, you probably know that there's an election in the United States in 10 days, and then there's going to be a possible presidency of Donald Trump for the next 4 years. Everybody in the world knows that, right? So is this like the rhetoric of the United States in the last, let's say, 4 to 8 years? Is it like we are a fractured body divided against itself, a lot of animosity, argument, fascist fighting with Antifa, etc., or problematic as it may be, we have the perception of like, oh, everything is great, golden age, we just comfortably oppress other people and live without being called out on that oppression, or that. I think that we are experiencing a kind of recognition of certain divisions, and we are sort of disagreeing with each other more violently, more intensely, more ideologically than before, right? So, you know, like take any issue, any political issue in the United States, it has, like, you know, I was watching this Netflix documentary on abortion yesterday, which I would recommend. Like people screaming at each other, and I'm not saying this one is, I mean, I am of course saying one is right, one is wrong, but regardless of that, you are somehow experiencing this. So this unhealthy, namely, we are not unified. Now, philosophy in this sense is actually much more problematic, Nietzsche says, for an unhealthy culture, because the more fundamentally we question our concepts, values, assumptions, presuppositions, the more divided we will be. So for an unhealthy culture that is divided, philosophy is no good. In fact, one of the reasons that I strongly believe, having read Nietzsche or other philosophers too, that United States in general is so divided and so politically is because of its relationship to learning in general, intellectualism in general, schools in general. Ever since that you are 1 year old, United States political system started to attack academics who are somehow questioning fundamental assumptions of Western civilization. So that I see as an indication, if you are divided, you don't want question. You want answer. You want to agree on certain things. Let's not kill each other. Let's agree that we are not gonna do this. So if the culture is sick, you search for unity, and philosophy doesn't unify. So therefore, philosophy is not useful for a culture that Nietzsche calls sick, and Germans don't know how to engage in philosophy because Germany at the time is sick. Now, it's not strictly speaking Germany, it is Prussia, Germans is like not a nation state, but you know what I'm talking about. So that is the argument. So philosophy is the exercise of a culture who is absolutely, not absolutely certain, but healthy in the sense of its recognition of itself. More of a style, more of a unity, and they are not trying to create a hegemonic artificial unity. When I get excited, you get quiet, so I get nervous. Questions? Josue, you look like you have a question.
No, I'm good.
I can feel you have a question. Okay, so he makes these two interrelated arguments. One of them is philosophy is the sign of a healthy culture. And he says the Greeks with their truly healthy culture, and we'll see what truly healthy means, because truly healthy for Nietzsche will actually characterize a tendency to be accepting of the other without excluding the other, and learning from the other, not exploiting, but like exploring the other, and assimilating it or accepting it, as opposed to when it becomes more Roman and Hellenistic, Greek culture becomes more exclusive. And I think I tend to read him as saying that the health of Greek culture is like they were comfortable with who they were to the extent that they didn't mind accepting others. And that has analogies to our society is as well, I believe, like the reason that we sort of now question the question, like how we treat the immigrants and the others, foreigners in the midst is, yes, it is about them to a certain extent, but not really. But it's really about who we think we are. We have fundamental problems about who we are. So the reason that we demonize the other is not really about the other as much as us not being able to understand who we are anymore. And that's the sort of problem of American culture. We constantly sort of, and when I say we, I'm using it very loosely. When we say like, oh, we are such a sort of melting pot and a great culture, accepting other people, the greatest country on the face of the earth, and blah, blah, all these kind of characterizations don't convince us anymore. That's why we are much more in crisis, because those kinds of claims don't work anymore. And we know they don't work, and they don't bring us together. They don't make us happy. They make us irritated, actually. So the Greeks, with their truly healthy culture, have once and for all justified philosophy simply by having engaged in it, and engaged in it more fully than any other people. Because they were much more, I mean, this is the sort of Nietzschean claim. Ironically, you are much more willing to accept the other if you are more comfortable with who you are. That's the claim. That's how I read him saying. So the Greeks, unlike Persians, unlike Chinese, who were in many ways much more closed in their relationship to other cultures than the Greeks. Greeks were open, not because they were superior, etc., but they didn't care to create an exclusive identity for themselves. They read everybody, they took everybody, they weren't sort of like, we are this and not that kind of approach. And I think that's really what, for him, makes the Greeks more fascinating for him, for true or false. But the other side of the argument is that he is really disturbed by this exclusive Germanness of the Germans. And you know how that plays itself out in Germany. So it's like, we are only Germans, exclusive, these are not us. That's also not being comfortable what it means to be German, and therefore try to create a sort of exclusive identity. So he's actually making it, let me just close it. So he's making this claim, yes, it is ostensibly about pre-Socratic philosophers, but it also says something about his understanding and interpretation of German identity. And I read him generously. I read him generously by attributing that characteristic to the Greeks as a characteristic. Now, did the Greeks have these characteristics? Probably empirically, factually, not to the extent that Nietzsche attributes to them. I'm sure there were Greeks who killed barbarians and they were horrified by them and they kept them outside of the gates of the city. So this is not like an absolute statement, but it really characterizes Nietzsche's sentiment with respect to having an identity exclusive is really, or this desire to create identity exclusively is really not having that identity consistently. Therefore, we say we always unify ourselves when there is a war. I mean, the example that Olivia gave was beautiful because it was around, if we find a common enemy, if we can say the other, the terrorist, etc., that somehow constitutes our identity as an American nation, which used to be Soviet Union and the communists and the Reds. That rhetoric doesn't function anymore. We need another sort of other immigrants, terrorists, blah, blah, because we are really not comfortable of who we are. Incidentally, also, since this whole thing started, American culture is also attacking philosophy, which to me, as a sort of little philosopher in his corner, a very good indication of how philosophical thought is actually contrary to this self-narcissism of the culture. So don't question, don't raise questions, don't raise doubts. We are trying to create a common element, commonality, which is everybody accepts. And we impose that upon other people because we cannot tolerate difference anymore. And question always introduces difference, so we cannot tolerate difference anymore. And then ever since like 9/11, but also like, especially in the last 4 years, we are much more interested in creating an exclusive identity for Americanness in everything we do. So that has, like, to me, a lot of political implications in terms of how we interpret history. And, you know, also, did you know that I didn't know? Okay, this is political. Okay, so this is the argument. He claims that they made up the archetypes of philosophic thought. And that's what we are going to see what they are with Thales starting, but Anaximander, he really concentrates on Heraclitus. So it will be helpful for you to read what Nietzsche says about him to work on your papers. So he calls them like, he constructs them as monolithic, and he includes the Thales, Anaximander, Heraclitus, Parmenides, Anaxagoras, Empedocles, Democritus, and Socrates. So he comes all the way to Socrates and then doesn't include Plato, and there are like, he has issues with how philosophy then changed with Plato. Okay, so those are the two arguments. Now he says we have very little extant words, like works that exist from them, and that speaks to the problem that we also saw with Kurt, Patricia Kurt, the edited work. You know, they are testimonies, either other people quoting them, and they have really little fragments, and he has access to Anaximander fragments, and then he discusses that, and we'll come back to that. But Nietzsche says, we have everything we need. it's not like our conception of the Greeks is going to change with more sort of evidence that we find, because what is relevant, and that's the heart of the argument that I want to frame the second half of the class in light of that idea. It's not what they said, what arguments they made, what truth claims they made, but how they lived. Philosophy was always a way of living, not having opinions, not having statements, claims, arguments, etc., but it was a questioning way of living one's life. It organizes one's relationship to the world and a relationship to themselves. So philosophy was, Nietzsche sometimes comes close to explicitly saying it, but it becomes much more explicit as we read on. It's a way of life. And the reason that we are somehow not capable of completely understanding that idea is because of what Jack said, that our way of constructing our lives are completely individualistic. And we sort of say, everybody lives according to how they want. It's their choice. It is like as good as anybody else. It's up to you. We respect the individual, etc. So we just don't even question that anymore. We don't even question of how one should live, because that question is already answered for you by forces outside of you. Everything that you can or cannot do in your life in terms of both economic, political, geographical, social, cultural norms seem to be determined. The range of possibilities for you seem to be determined. And one of the reasons that we feel the weight of modern world so far is because we are being fed this idea that we are free. Do whatever you want. You can do whatever you want. This infinite realm of possibilities contrasted to your vision that these possibilities are actually quite limited depending on your level of privilege in society. And that sort of mismatch, we have no tools to deal with that. And I believe Nietzsche says that it's philosophy. Philosophy is a way of understanding life in such a way that you can free yourself from these conditions to a certain extent. Never absolutely, but to a certain extent. So when I say to my students, for example, like people ask you like, why did you choose philosophy? And I quite like earnestly and seriously say, that was the only way for me to live. I really didn't consider myself capable of living in any other way. And I noticed that early, but like that, like I probably wouldn't be able to continue living if it wasn't for philosophy, honestly. Yes, Jack.
What's so special about philosophy that it played such a significant role in your understanding of life and your life in general?
Well, that's a very difficult question. That's still a question for me, but as I said, to be able to negotiate this idea of you are free to live, you are free to do whatever you want, etc., blah, blah, all this discourse about individualism in society. And coupled with that is your absolute feeling of the opposite. I am meaningless by myself. I cannot accomplish anything. The conditions that I was born to, I wasn't even speaking the right language. Everything was stacked against, like, this is terrible, it's stupid, etc. So the only way to negotiate is to understand what are these demands by society that made on me that I consider to be given. Like, why do I have to be working like this? Why do I have to behave like this? Why do I have to associate with people in this way. And to be honest, it wasn't psychology, it was philosophy, even though I started, because psychology operates with the assumption that there is a society that you should somehow integrate to. Somehow the assumption that like we should heal people to integrate into society and live as productive members of society. And I hate that. I don't want, like, that's just like a horrible conservative and problematic assumption. No, this society should change. I'm not fucking like integrating into this society because that's not healthy. That's not, the society is not healthy. Why am I not healthy? The society is not healthy. So there are lots of other questions that were left unanswered for me. So that's why and then I have a lot of problems with philosophical discourse too. So that's the sort of the beauty of philosophy. You don't really need, like, you can be in philosophy and hate it. And I don't think that you can, I mean, that's actually a good answer. So the only discipline that you can absolutely hate while doing it is philosophy. And that sort of kind of liberates too. Like I teach Nietzsche. When somebody says Nietzsche is a terrible person and he sucks, and I was like, okay. I mean, I don't feel like personally sort of attacked by this, like my little Nietzsche that I protect or something like that, because it's not about him. It's not about Nietzsche himself. It's about the ideas that he had that I may or may not accept. I accept some of them, I reject others. So I don't have any kind of affiliation, any kind of loyalty to him or any other philosopher for that. So one thing that really surprised, like for example, I mean, and also philosophy is like a little bit innocuous. Somebody said, like a couple of years ago,
Timely by being untimely. It's like in the intro, which I thought was interesting, but I didn't really understand much. And then it followed that the philosopher is kind of alienated and maladjusted to society, which I understood to be sort of like this distinction between vita practica and vita contemplativa. The latter being, the philosopher. But yeah, I was just wondering about that quote, what that meant.
yes,
Being timely and being untimely.
if you read the introduction, you don't have to, but if you read the introduction, that she sort of describes Nietzsche's experience a little bit, that he was a professor of philology at the age of 24 in Switzerland, but nobody was going to his classes. Philosophers at the time said, don't take his classes. They said, like, this guy is like saying crazy things. And so there is a certain academic philosophy that is completely despicable. There is a power structure. There's people who sort of attach to philosophers like you attach to some sort of sects and some beliefs or something like that. So Nietzsche is completely against that. So for him, being a philosopher is not having a job. Being a philosopher is not sort of just thinking about life and asking abstract questions. It's never about like, what did Kant says on page 127 as opposed to 129. This is what it is about vita activa, having an active life as a philosopher, to live as a philosopher. Now, in the modern world, of course, it's pretty obvious that a lot of philosophers, including myself, live in this fake life. We say a bunch of things about society, but we sort of live within the power structure of that society and support and perpetuate it. Yes, but Nietzsche believed that there is also a calling in philosophy that is a fundamental disagreement with being. It's a fundamental disagreement with society. It is not part of that society because that society has fundamental problems. And I think that's really what is appealing in Nietzsche and subsequent readers of Nietzsche, that he says something about way of life rather than a job. Way of being, way of making decisions, way of relating to others, way of relating to yourself in a way that's different. Now, is that guaranteed? No. Does that always happen? Absolutely not. Do you still have to live in a society? Yes. Do you still need to listen to your colleagues babble about stupid things? Sure. But philosophy gives you the possibility of somehow establishing a different relationship to that. So contemplation is not at the expense of activity, but informs and defines your activity. So he sees that exemplified in ancient pre-Socratic philosophers. They were not scholars, they were not professors, they were not people who were making money by teaching people how to speak, etc. I mean, sometimes okay, so I live in this paradox. Like, I'm supposed to teach you certain skills to be successful in this society. I don't believe in that. I mean, I just don't. Like, if you come here to me or to this class, to philosophy, in order to learn certain skills to be successful in society, when I give this spiel every year, like, what can you do with a philosophy degree? You can go to law school because you are so smart, and try to sort of make philosophy appealing to you, indicates for me that I actually accept the terms of this society. That I think that you should be comfortable in life. You should be successful in life. You should be good and make a lot of money. I don't believe those. Like, I literally don't. Like, how can I tell you that, like, oh, I'll make you successful? I don't think you should be successful. It's criminal to be successful in this society. And you should, like, die under a bridge alone, homeless, sure. But that's not what life is about. Life is not about, like, being successful or making money or having a good reputation, having so many likes on Instagram. It's not. So that's the paradox that philosopher lives. Like, how do I teach? How do I pretend to be a professor to tell you, like, if you listen to me, you are going to be successful in life. I'll get you free internships in certain places and make you successful. I mean, how can I honestly say that to anybody? Where philosophy always teaches me that, like, we are living in a thoughtless society. Yes, you should be unhappy. You should complain about the society. You should not reconcile yourself with so much injustice. You shouldn't. You shouldn't be part of this. So how do I teach that while working in a school which charges $50,000 in tuition for your education? That's the paradox, and we live it. And philosophy is the only discipline that allows me to question that to the extent that is necessary for my health. Otherwise, I would be in any other discipline trying to teach you certain skills. So that's why, as you quoted, like, it's not a question of what you can do with philosophy, but what philosophy can do with you. And you have only one life too. It's like, you know, you don't have to, like, fear that it's going to be like, oh, if I don't do all the things that the society expects me to do, that I'm going to be a loser and I'm going to be poor. I'm going to live alone and die alone. Sure, in this freaking world, you should die alone and live alone because that's what it deserves. Okay, that was too much, whatever.
Fari, what if in a society in the future they make it so philosophers are like top tier paying jobs? Would that change it?
That would be dystopia. That would be the worst thing. I hate philosophers. I hate that. Like, we have this star system in which certain philosophers are paid more in academia. No, I don't think it's about money at all. I mean, I would probably hate that society too. No, that would be a bad society. Not just I would hate it. But again, like philosophy is always like, whenever you are reading the Greeks, you are also reading yourself. Whenever you are reading Descartes, you are already also reading yourself. It is never a question of not having a self relationship to yourself. You don't just learn a subject matter. You don't just learn an object like modern philosophy or ancient Greek philosophy, etc. You always learn a relationship of yourself to that and relationship of yourself to yourself. So it's always that you're always implicated in what you are doing in a way that I never felt that I was implicated and included in what I was studying in other disciplines. So I don't, well, I can relate to myself as a chemical being, but I didn't feel the same thing with respect to chemistry. I didn't feel the same thing with respect to biology, even though I'm a living being. I didn't feel that in psychology, which I studied for a year. That was 1 year of my life that I can never get back, but I did that. I mean, I had a traumatic relationship with psychology, so don't take my words too seriously about it. And then I studied other things, etc. But it's the only discipline in which you have that relationship to yourself, which also happens to be the root of all disciplines anyway. So it doesn't really like, I didn't make that. I'm not like advertising it or in any way. It's just the fact. Like, you know, everybody was a philosopher, subsequently became details within that branch of knowledge. Yes. Is it hot or is it me? Yes. Travis.
I have a question about what you said earlier. You're saying that life isn't about so and so, but isn't it like up to the person or the individual to decide what they want their life to be about?
Sure. I guess one question to me, philosophically most interesting, is like, I grew up wanting certain things. I never really asked whether I want them or whether that was a demand on me that I internalized. So, and I'm like, at this age, I still don't know what I want. Like, I never really think that I authentically asked that question to myself. And I don't think anybody is. When you have these aspirations, dreams, 10-year goals, blah, blah. These are all made up categories to make us feel good about the fact that we don't ask to ourselves because we don't have the courage to even discover what we want, whatever the hell that means. So they tell you, like, make a plan, have goals, establish goals. What am I? Like, am I a machine of like goal producing and goal achieving machines? I don't have goals. What the hell does that mean? Like, philosophy allows you to question in a radical way every single aspect of your life. I like that. I mean, some people don't, which is good, fine. I'm not saying everybody should study philosophy. But when we read somebody and when we judge somebody like Nietzsche or Anaximander or Heraclitus, we are also implicated in that judgment. We are also judging ourselves. We are revealing our prejudices, our convictions, what is right and what is wrong for us. In that interpretation, we are also putting ourselves on the table. Now, I don't feel doing that when I study anything else. I don't think that my interpretation or my solving a math problem or a sort of equation in economy, etc., doesn't implicate me in a way that it does in philosophy. So in a way, that's the best way to understand yourself while engaging with these texts, because everything that Nietzsche writes about the Greeks in Germany in 18 something, 19th century, has implications for today for me. The way in which I make analogies with the Greek society of what he says in terms of assimilating other cultures, and gives me ways of thinking today in a different way. So it's always about here and now. Philosophy is always about how to live your life here and now. It's never just a mere curiosity about the past. And every time I read a text, I sort of say, here's how I'm going to live from now on. Which I sometimes do, sometimes don't. So I've been thinking, this is the first time in a long time I'm teaching ancient Greek philosophy. Like, why are they taking this class? Like, what is that going to do for them? How is that going to improve their lives? Is it just 4 credits that they need to fulfill in order to pass a requirement that was completely arbitrary? And then, are they interested in ancient Greek philosophy? Like, how could one be interested in something so distant, so much in the past? Why do people take this? And the only justification, I mean, there are, of course, many justifications, but the only thing is, like, if it doesn't teach you anything about yourself, anything that you discover about yourself, it's completely meaningless. If you don't find yourself in this, if you don't, I mean, as Nietzsche does, I mean, this is all about, like, when I read this text, it's almost exclusive, I mean, not really, but almost about Nietzsche himself. He's talking about the ancient Greeks, like what we consider to be privileging them, etc., is because he has a trouble with himself. He has a trouble with his position within the university. He has a trouble with Germans at the time. He is dealing with his present. And it is always like when we read Sophocles, when we read Antigone, to me, it's always about today, about now, about me, about how I think about my own life. To the extent of recognizing that it's not even all my own life. I live somebody else's fears and expectations and definitions of success, etc. So that to me is really the only possible definition of education. Everything else is Wikipedia. You can look it up. You can find out. So I consider what we are doing something very serious because it is literally existentially transformative rather than simply being a high school class about learning certain facts.
I think that's the key idea behind ancient Greek philosophy, because we spoke about this earlier. I mean, but just Plato and so many and other philosophers just created so much of our thinking behind natural sciences or academia and other areas like that. So I mean, I guess the reason why most people would study it is because of the ability to just get the building blocks behind how did we want to learn, and being able to understand where it came from. It helps us build on the nuances of new ideas. So, you know.
That's an excellent point, and I completely agree with that, and that's why, like, if you read, okay, so I'll say something a little bit hyperbolic, but like, if we want to understand why we are a patriarchal society today, we need to read the Greeks. If we need to understand why we are such a culturally oppressive society today, we need to go all the way back to the Greeks and the evolution of our thought that brought us here. So academia has an obligation to diagnose and understand whatever we consider to be the problems of contemporary society. And they did not emerge because some people are bad and some people are evil, some people are greedy, etc. That's all true, but also it has much deeper seated archetypes of thought that we have really doesn't allow us to deal with our problems in contemporary society. And we are moving away from that. And that's sort of like, don't study philosophy, don't question things, because we try to create a hegemonic society that doesn't question what it does.
This is a little bit off topic, but once we get like androids and stuff, should we be teaching them philosophy, like giving them books and stuff?
You mean the machines like AI, artificial? What we should, yeah. No, it will be too late by then. I think that I don't think, yeah. Or maybe it's already too late. I mean, I sometimes think like what I'm doing is completely meaningless in contemporary world. Like, who cares about philosophy? Like, it's just like some nostalgic sort of discourse, which makes me love it even more, because it's like it has the less contribution it has to contemporary society, the happier I get. Yes, Olivia.
Just related to what Jared said, I feel like if there ever was an example of like a scientific discipline where people needed to like stop and calm down and think about the philosophical implications of what they're doing, it's like the attempts to build generalized AIs that can think like humans and behave like humans. Like that's the absolute worst idea I've ever heard. And people are just like, we're gonna do it for science. And it concerns me very much.
Well, I think, I mean, the question is like, has it been already built to a certain extent? I mean, is there a categorical leap, or are we not on the way to that?
We're barely on the way. People like to overblow how close we are, but it's like we've barely made any progress in developing a generalized AI, which is good.
Oh, generalized AI. Okay, yeah. So like a matrix type of thing.
Yeah, we have AIs that can do very specific tasks, like play chess or whatever, but we don't have one that can like.
But I mean, if we make human beings do only specific tasks too, then we don't need a generalized AI, because there is no generalized human being either. So your function is a being this or that. You are a sort of reduced to your function in society. You only know certain things. So my issue is not so much that we will create a generalized AI as much as we'll make ourselves is individualized AIs. Like we as human beings are already on the way of being machines. So we always think like we'll make machines like human beings. No, we are going to make human beings like machines. That's to me is much more daunting.
Yeah, we're already cyborgs. We can't live without our technology. Our phones are a part of us.
Yeah, it's actually worse than that, but you are absolutely right. That's one step towards that. Like, you know, I talk to certain people. Don't you get that impression? Like, with all the things that you say, all your opinions and all your convictions, I would rather talk to an AI rather than you. You reduced yourself to such a shell of an individual human being, then I would rather talk to her, you know, Scarlett Johansson, you see in the movie, her. So to me, it's already like, just because you are a human being doesn't mean that you are worse than an AI right now. And you have that experience. I mean, especially in politics, it's like, really? You really said that? Like, honestly, like, are you like a human or a machine talking behind this face? Well, I can't say that, that's arrogant, so I take that back. So yeah, it always sort of, for some reason, excites me to read Nietzsche, despite the fact that I disagree with most of what he says. It really tells me about what philosophy is about, and that's why he's so appealing to a lot of people, even though people radically disagree with him in terms of his convictions. And it's also the case that, you know, and I'm not talking about like political, I think intellectual disagreement about certain things is really invigorating and something that we should endorse rather than to cover over and say like, oh, you have to accept, because we have this kind of either role model or a kind of public figure conception of we want them to be perfect, say everything that we like and everything that we agree. We expect that from each other. We expect that from ourselves. And human beings are never like that. They will all at some point disappoint you. Yes, Travis.
Actually, I looked up Nietzsche on the internet. And I don't know how true this is because it's Wikipedia, but it said that he went mad. So I think it was just like important to know that he went mad.
Well, actually, according to the records, he had a physical meningitis of the brain. So he got a virus and got mad, like became mentally ill at the end of his life, not because of studying philosophy, although I love that idea that you can actually make yourself crazy studying philosophy. Some people say that to me sometimes, like, oh, I think about this so much, I'm going to go crazy. No one has ever, including Nietzsche, gone mad from thinking. A lot of people go mad from not thinking. And so don't be afraid of questioning every aspect of your life all the time. That's not going to make you mentally unstable. But yeah, Nietzsche was, last 11 years of his life, he was really sick. But he got like some actual physical virus while fighting in a war or something. Although Plato thinks that philosophy is madness, so that would make Nietzsche the perfect philosopher. But he has enormous influence. So let's just keep reading and think about your papers. And you know, I'll put the prompt on Moodle today, and you can look it up. And then I have like these comments and suggestions for papers. I'm gonna talk about them, but most important, I really want you to write something not simply as a task, but something that you will enjoy and take pleasure while writing and somehow implicated in what you write. So don't look at it just like an exam or something like that, but somehow synthesizing of everything, most of the things that we are doing in class. So try to enjoy it because we are living in difficult times and you need some mental stimulation to get through. So. Okay, enough for today. Please read up to page 61, at least, the same book. I don't know whether this is the cover online, but up to the end of section 6. Actually, you can continue, but we'll spend maybe 1 or 2 more days on Nietzsche, and then we'll move on. So, okay, I'll see you on Monday. Have a nice weekend.